And we're just kind of trying to move it in a positive direction. One of the other things that kind of came up is we think that the YMCA and the Water District are on the same path. Essentially, the YMCA property is a non-conforming use, and the Water District would like to see performance-based standards in the ordinance someday. I said, well, you both want the same thing. Why don't you work on it? So I think that has started. So they've started the next round of ordinance reviews, and I think that that's going to be the topic of discussion. Whether it happens or not, will take some time. The business office sent out reminder notices on 2014 taxes, 400 reminder notices. The nomination period closed out, so we know all of the positions. I think there's challengers on the school trustees. I'll have to look, and there's challengers for the selectmen. Other than that, it'll be unopposed. We're working on the town report. Heidi Fuller has been doing the town report this year. I've kind of shared with you some of our ideas as we've gone along. It's going to look pretty neat, so look forward to it. Also, we put together new performance evaluation forms. The idea of doing this is it simplified the performance evaluation. When I was doing them, when I first got here, we didn't have a performance evaluation system in place, so we put one in. It was very heavy in narration, so we've eliminated some of that, and now the department heads are going to start doing their own performance evaluations, which was always the intent, but we wanted to get a few years under our belt first. They're all on board with that. I'm skipping around a little bit. We've corresponded with Senator Johnson and Representative Bruce McDonald on the topic of LD 369, the education bill, and I think I've emailed all this to you. But just to be thorough for Channel 7, Senator Johnson's expecting to come to our April 9th meeting, and I have also given you the information that he sent to us, so you can review that before then. We submitted to the Maine Local Road Center the Raider Speed Trailer Program, and we're going to get the speed trailer this year. I'm not going to announce it on Channel 7 when it comes in. Surprise some speeders. We are working, we're going to try to see if we can trade out with another town and get it during maybe one of our more heightened periods. And then the last thing under reports, I just gave you at the last second. I put together an evaluation process that I'm proposing for the town manager. Last year when we did evaluation, we kind of stumbled through the process a little bit. And I don't believe, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, we had an evaluation process for the manager that was of any substance. So since I've come on, we put in an evaluation process, but it was okay. Essentially based on the chairman's discussion with me, I've incorporated in some mechanisms, a qualitative, a quantitative review, and a 360 feedback review. So essentially you would send the form that's in here to your department, your lower level managers. They would critique the manager, it would go back to the chairman, and then you'd have more tools to make decisions about performance. The reason why I bring it up tonight and it's not on the agenda is I, first of all, didn't know I was going to get it done in time. But if you look at the calendar and that I propose, we would get started on this quickly. Essentially, we talk about it today. Next meeting, you start doing some of the actions of this. The intent is, by my purposeful intent, is to make sure that the current board does the review and then the changeover board does any compensation. So that if there's any changeover in the board. That way the town manager is always getting a review based on the people he worked with and not the new people on the board.
This actually comes from, remember the discussion we had, I don't know if it was 6 or 8 months ago, whenever it was, about the townsman article. I don't know if you ever remember me bringing it up. If you go back, I asked Jim to get copies of that, because it's an interesting article about doing evaluation on town managers, and it was after we had done ours the last time, and it had talked about different ways that they do it. I thought it was a great article. So that's, I think, where this comes from. For most, I haven't read it, so I can't tell you for sure. But
this is written based on that article.
I mean, if you can find on the archives at the townsman, read it. It got very positive feedback from everybody that they interviewed in that article and stuff, and said that they loved it. So something to think about, anyway.
It is something to think about. I'm just not comfortable starting to use it at the next meeting. I mean, we just got this and haven't had a chance to read through it. So we haven't had a chance to adopt it is what we're going to use.
So we can discuss it at our next April 9th.
Yeah, and you could just shift the timeline a little bit. Essentially what March says is that you introduce the idea, you make tweaks and changes, you can just bump that to April, and kind of stay on the timeline. Essentially what you would do in April is that we would meet in executive session, we would talk about, essentially I put together some written comments to give to you on essentially what I think you should consider while you do the review. That's that first part. Also, you do the 360 feedback. So, I mean, essentially what you would be doing in April is data collection, you know.
I think that's safe anyway. That is always good. Information always good.
You don't have to adopt a policy to get that going.
The thing I liked the best about that article when I read it was not only do we give the feedback to people that work directly under him also. I mean, yeah, obviously they're not doing the evaluation, but you get to hear what they have to say. If there's a lot of negatives, that's important for us because they get to see the day-to-day more so than we do. So I just thought it was a great idea. Whether it'll work or not, I don't know. We may go through it one time and absolutely hate it. I don't know that answer.
Sure.
I mean, I know going down building checkboxes is kind of fly.
The feedback that we get, is that anonymous?
Good question. I guess it would be up to us.
Well, the reason I asked that, and don't take this the wrong way, Jim, I mean, any of us who are managers, all of our people don't necessarily like us. But they're also not necessarily going to go on the record as saying that either.
The way it's designed is that I never get to see the show.
Right, I was
Right,
going to
it would be just
say,
us.
I think that would come to us, that information would come to us, and I don't think his eyes should ever really have to see it.
I never get to see those forms. Essentially, it says that the managers fill them out and give them directly to the chairman.
We just get once we read this, we're going to see that. I have to do this. We'll discuss it at our next meeting. That's the best way to do it. Okay. That's all you have for reports?
That's all I have.
I just had one thing. You brought up the issue over the YMCA, and I was going to ask this even before you showed up, Ryan. So, the article that was written in the Register mentioned a consent agreement and a $750 fine. I'm assuming that that was an error because only this board can fine somebody and enter into a consent agreement.
It was written as a fine, but it was essentially.
That's the triple the after the fact permit fee, correct?
Except for on this particular one, there is no fee. There's no fee for doing the action that they did. So what we did is we didn't feel like that was enough teeth to have a consent agreement that you just go back before the planning board. We wanted the triple E action, so we took the shoreline development fee and we tripled that. So it was essentially to try. This is the first time we've stumbled across that since we've changed fees, and I think we would do the same thing with a demo where that's free. Essentially, we'd have to come up with some triple fee so that it's just not triple zero. So that's where we can. It's not a fine. It's a consent agreement. They agree to pay $750 and apply. And essentially the way that's under the code enforcement officer's authority. Now that just allows them to not have a violation so that they can go to the planning board and ask for retro permission. If we didn't do the consent agreement, the code enforcement officer would have to do a violation and then they wouldn't be eligible to apply. So it created this kind of.
And then that would come before us if they was fined, so to speak. If he was going to fine them by the day or whatever.
Once there's a violation, then that takes all consent agreements out except for your authority. So essentially we wanted to avoid a violation until we knew if the planning board would or would not approve this retroactive permission. It seemed like the path of least resistance.
Go back up to public hearing, because Phil and Annette Main is here, so it's a public hearing for Philip J. and Annette Main, Dover used car parts, map R2, lots 24A and 24B, at 76 Dover Road, renewal of a junkyard permit.
So this is a historical junkyard that we've had for as long as I've been here, and you can tell me how long it's been there, I don't know. So it's our only one in town, so we look forward to it every year. But the application's been received in full. You have the original copy in the blue folder up there. We did give you some pictures to show you what the fencing is for the property. That would be our only concern, is this the fence inappropriate? Other than that, the town really doesn't have anything, and we would ask if the public does.
So it's a requirement to have a fencing for a junkyard, I assume?
Yeah, you have to, and the idea is that the fencing has to buffer the view of the junkyard.
What is that, Phil?
Which
The fence. It's white. It looks almost like an old garage door.
Well, it's just stopped called the freezer when they tore it years ago.
It's pretty rugged.
Oh, yeah. No refrigeration.
They just look like they took a winter toll.
Yeah, well, it hasn't everybody.
Yeah. So I take it then will be corrected in
Oh,
the
yeah.
spring.
Right.
Okay with that as a fence material? I mean, I'm not the one that looks at it every day. I'm just making sure that.
Guys, just look at it. It's a junkyard.
We haven't had any complaints.
We haven't had any complaints.
That's all I'm worried
As
about.
long as them are straightened back up, so it looks halfway
I
decent.
would move we approve, fix the fence as soon as the weather allows.
Second.
Any more discussion? Any public discussion, I should say. Public hearing. All those in favor? Wonderful.
Okay, thanks, guys.
We'll have that ready for you tomorrow.
Okay.
So we'll go to two agendas, I think.
Yeah, public comment and then.
Public comment? Nobody's here.
Nothing to
So we'll go to Eileen King from AOS 98, School Superintendent, FY 2015 School Budget. Before you start, Eileen, can I ask one question?
Sure.
It's really not, well, it could potentially be about school budget. LD 369, do you know anything about that?
No, I was gonna ask Jim about it. I'm following 1807, but not 369.
It's the one that died, essentially, Senator Johnson had proposed, it was supposed to, I can't remember the exact title. I probably have it in there.
I'm following the reinstatement of the 9.5 back into GPA.
This was education.
That was the restructuring of,
Education funding or whatever.
Oh, for the EPS and the PICUS report?
No, this was to go back kind of like the 70s method and have the land-rich communities pay more.
Yeah, property tax, how property tax assessment is
Okay.
done for,
And that died though, didn't it?
it died, but essentially it's been reconsidered and it came up on our radar, so that's why we asked our local senator to come and explain it to us.
I mean, that could potentially really damage Boothbay Harbor and so forth.
Yes, it could.
In the state size where we're hugely land rich. I mean,
Which is why although the system's not perfect, it's fair to the people that live here.
Just curious if you,
Did you pass last time?
They did electronically, and then I think Dan printed them out.
Yes, we
You
have
have
that.
all of this, right? Yeah. And you should have this.
Did you have the clarification page as well?
Yep.
Okay, all right. This year I started differently. I went right to the tax assessment because you guys usually rip to that page first. So I'm starting with that page on the top. And this year's budget, let me just... The overall expenditures we're proposing is a $9,300,000 budget, which is $263,000 over last year. If you reduce our revenue, which is made up of the general fund balance, and actually I am going to the projected revenue page right now, just to give you a summary. We do have the general fund balance is a expected carry forward for this year and leftover carry forward from last year that we use to apply to offset our expenditures. Our international fund, once again, we had 4 international students, and we have some money remaining that we can use to reduce those expenses. State subsidy, this is a soft number. They're expecting right now $530,000. However, Jim Ryer, the commissioner, has told us that he expects some decreases. However, he's been saying that for the last 12 years, so I thought we would go ahead and put that in there, and if I need to decrease it, I can do that. June 13th, I put down additional subsidy. They did reinstate $9.5 million back into GPA last year to help with the cost of teacher retirement. We were given an additional $90,000. It was done after we had our school budget meeting, so that $90,000 is being automatically applied to offset next year's subsidy. And as far as tuition, these are our students that come in from outside of the Boothbay Harbor School District. We are no longer getting school psychology money any longer because we just have someone who, we've been able to reduce those expenses, but in the same time we lost some of that revenue from other towns because they're hiring their own person to do that job. Other than that, everything else has gone down just a little bit, but if you look at our expenditures, you subtract our revenue, the assessment to the towns is going to be $7,851,258, which is $190,000 increase over last year, or 4.8% over last year. So that, if you go to the tax assessment to your towns right now, based on this year's numbers and this year's enrollment, and compared to last year's numbers and last year's enrollment, and if you break the budget down according to how we're supposed to break debt services 60-40, adult ed is 60-40, your regular budget, once again, is 68% and 32%, which reflects your percent of the population. Your increase is $129,000, or a 2.48% increase over last year. The last page is our cost center page. And I can go through this line by line unless you'd just like to target some lines, and Steve is going, no thanks. I can speak to a couple of the lines that have gone up significantly. Once again, transportation has gone up $28,000. Do you have it? I have extra copies.
That's good, Chuck.
Yeah.
Page 2.
Most of the increases right now, you see, we've worked very hard at keeping this budget as flat as possible. We are currently in negotiations with our support staff, which are our ed techs, our food cafeteria staff, and our custodials, and we're also in negotiations with our teaching staff as well. So we've had to project what we expect to have an increase for salaries and benefits. Almost all of the increases throughout this are salaries and benefits. We have nothing new in the debt service. I want to make that very clear. The debt service will cover the current debt that we have right now, which is our 2 HVAC projects, the security loan and the tennis court loan. The transportation has gone up. We are going to be requesting a new bus, and we're going to lease it out for 5 years so that we don't incur an $89,000 increase in 1 year. And we will let the town managers know that we'll be going into getting a lease for a new school bus. We currently have 3 spares. Our fleet for backups, we have one that's recently been taken off the road because it has not passed inspection. We've been requesting a bus for 3 years, and it's time to get a new bus in the fleet.
I think I've asked this question before, but why don't we budget into a capital replacement fund to be able to replace one every couple of years and just be able to pay for it?
Because we can only put away $12,500 a year.
Why?
That's in the charter. We're only allowed to raise $12,500.
So why not change the charter? I mean, 12.5 back in 1950 was a great number. 12.5 today doesn't buy the tires hardly. I mean, that...
It's our capital reserve fund that we actually use to work on projects of building and grounds.
I hate to beat a dead horse, but it seems every time we ask a question, and when I say we, I don't mean us, I mean in general, it always goes back to the charter says, and the charter was done in 1950. I'm sure it was great back then, But that makes no sense to not be able to budget for you guys to have a new bus, you know, I mean.
How about a
that's-
committee to update the charter? That would be neat.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, what am I missing? Maybe I'm missing something, but. The money that you're gonna spend in interest on leases of buses would more than pay, over the long run, would more than pay for the lawyer fees you're gonna run into on changing the charter. And at least it's money well spent. Well, it will over time, but, I mean, it's gonna cost money, but it's gotta be done sooner or later. I mean, 12.5, that's ludicrous.
Well, it keeps our costs down.
Yeah. But I mean, you're gonna pay an interest rate on a bus loan.
We get pretty competitive rates.
Right, but it's
Very
still
competitive.
something.
Yeah.
Whereas if you could set that money away yearly, every couple, 3 years, you could say, oh, I need a new bus, the money's there, you buy it. It's that easy.
It's either there or repairs, unfortunately.
And as the bus fleet gets older, our
You know,
repairs.
Because of those Thomases years ago, when 4 of them were taken off the road at once.
That was 2003.
2003.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to take it one
So
step
they had
further,
replaced 4 in 1 year, so we've got 4 that are the same year old, which is.
but to take it one step further, I mean, like when your heating system or something goes down, if you was able to budget money into some sort of a capital replacement or reserve fund, you don't take that big hit and say, oh geez, where am I gonna get the money to make this payment? You've got the money there. I mean, it's just good business sense is to have some sort of a fund there. I mean, I couldn't imagine the town or anything not having, I mean, it's common now.
There is legislation that does prohibit schools from having significant capital improvement reserves. We don't have a general fund per se like the towns do. So we are limited to what we're required to, what we are allowed to do.
I'm not sure,
I would have to look into
it's
it.
probably a certain percentage of your budget would be my.
I know very few school systems that have large backups.
But what's a bus cost? Must be
Really, about 85, 88,
So, I
depending.
mean, that's not significant, really. That's what, 1% of your budget,
Mhm.
right? So realistically, if you was able to, over time, save 5% of your budget, that's 5 buses. That's a no-brainer. I'd rather see us put money away and buy a bus every 2 or 3 years and pay no interest on that money than pay a bank anything.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of things in the charter that should be updated. The question is it worth it?
Is there reluctance to look at the charter because of the cost share? Is that?
You'd have to ask the.
I mean, we keep aiming at you, we're not working.
I mean, for the most part, the charter has worked very well. Obviously, the 12.5 is
Yeah,
a number that
that's what I
doesn't
mean,
really
it's-
work anymore, but for the majority of the charter, it's a really good system. We have 2 boards, which I think works really well. We have the trustees looking at, the buildings and grounds, and we've got the school committee overseeing the education side of things. So I think that part of it works really well. There's a risk that we would run by going into the charter that we might lose that. That we could end up with just 1 board.
How would you lose that?
Well, because I believe that we are the only school system in the state with this system.
But it still ultimately would be up to the voters to approve or disapprove.
Yeah, I mean, financial changes are the only thing that I think.
There's some variance as to what the actual state would allow us to do once we open that charter.
I mean, I don't disagree that, I mean, it's worked well for 60 years. But it's like anything else. I mean, you could have the best truck in the world, it could be your pride and joy, but over time it needs repairs. Anything you can say that, and
It's just weighing that out and whether, it is warranted in doing it right now. But,
On that note, though, you're striking it. Is it warranted right now? It's going to be warranted at some point in time, and probably not in the too distant future, I would think.
it would make sense to be more proactive than reactive, I guess.
And the other part of that is, I'm not disagreeing that there's probably great things in that charter that work really, really well, and I don't see why you can't. I mean, obviously, if the state gets involved and says you can't have a 2-board system, well, that's one thing. But I mean, you should be able to maintain the parts that work well and keep those. But do the research you need to do and update the stuff that needs updating from 1956 to 2014.
I'm just not sure how much of it really needs to be updated. I mean, it was a very well-written document. I'm just not convinced that we gain anything by going through that process.
if not much has to be updated, then it wouldn't cost much to fix it. Really?
Except for the state gets a chance to say.
Yeah,
"Okay,
that's-
you
that's the
have
question.
to know
What
what
kind of
the
can of worms we open
ramifications.
up by, you know, where it goes, you know.
You have to know what the ramifications would be before you did it, yes.
I don't have enough information to weigh in on that. I would have to spend some time researching that, what the possibilities
And it would be
are.
legal, I mean, we'd have to have legal consultations.
Right.
and
Oh,
figure
no
out
doubt,
what
but it would at least be worth looking into. I mean, in my opinion, just for something simple as that, if you're gonna budget 20 grand a year over 5 years, that's $100,000 on an $80,000 bus.
You can look at it this way. Any document when it's first written is a very good document, and there are good things that can go generations without needing to be changed. But at some point, amendments need to be made on everything. And I think what these guys are asking is, can you guys take a look at it and see what needs to be amended? I mean, not having capital reserve accounts in this day and age, I'm sorry, it's foolish.
Well, but if we are also mandated by the state as to what we can reserve, I mean, that would have to be looked into, because
Well, so
if they tell us we can raise $20,000, well, you know, what's the difference?
It'd be at least worth looking into, you know.
I could bring it back to both boards. I can't, you know,
Sure.
they're not here to weigh in, so
Yeah.
I certainly can.
The thing is a law. We talk about it as a separate document, the charter. It is a law. It's a law of the state made, and it can be amended and has been amended 6 or 7 times without opening the whole
Without
thing.
technically opening the
Amendments
charter.
can be made on
It can,
anything.
yes.
So something that simple, probably.
But it still has to go up through the legislature, and you have to have, you know, they vote on it just like any other law.
Isn't our local rep on the education committee? I mean,
Yes,
There's-
chairman of it, but
Right.
it won't be much longer.
I don't know if it would go to the education committee or whether it would go to the private and specials.
but either way, what I'm saying is he's a proponent of education, and that I don't think he'd have a hard time bringing a good amendment to a law forward.
Are you done doing your, I have a question or two, if you don't mind. At what point does, I mean, every year, if you look at the student enrollment, it's going down little by little. At what point does that start translating in budget numbers? You know what I mean? I understand that you gotta keep a certain amount of staff on, and I don't deny that one bit, but at what point, I mean, there's gotta be that tipping point at some point. I mean, because student enrollment keeps going like this, the budget keeps going like this, and at some point, there's gotta be a breaking point that you say, okay, what are we gonna do?
In 2007 and 8, 2006 and 7, I'm sorry, and 8, our budgets were relatively flat. Now I have to go back and I have to go back and really look at which year they were, because we get to a point where every time we have an opening now, we look at staffing levels. We look at the number of students, look at the number of students taking the classes. We look at what our certification levels are for our staff, what they're certified to teach, and do we need to fill the position or not? And that happens with every single opening we have. If we don't need to fill it, and we have reduced the staff significantly, where we used to have, for example, 3 teachers at each grade, 4 in 7th grade and 4 in 8th grade, and we reduced that down to 2 in each grade, and I think 3 in 7th, or actually 5 teachers in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we do look at that. That being said, you're still dealing with salaries and benefits. So we have done reduction in force several years ago, where we did reduce our population, our staffing, due to a change in programming. And right now, we're looking at roughly about 600 kids next year, including our students that attend, that live in Boothbay Harbor, and the students that come in through tuition. Also, I'm planning on putting out an ad in some of the papers of our choice towns that live around us, like Newcastle, Alna, Westport, where they don't have their own high school, and see if we can attract some students to participate in the STEM Academy, and maybe start to attract more tuition students that way.
Is the talk of the scarcity, is that dead?
Nope, actually, it's pretty much alive. Tomorrow, Friday morning, the board chairs from the AOS board, so from Georgetown, Edgecombe, Southport, and the Boothbay Harbor CSD, John Burley, who was also the chair for the AOS board alone, And then 2 board members from Wiscasset and their interim superintendent are sitting down at the table to discuss. They want to learn more about the AOS, they want to learn how it works, they want to learn what the options are as they move forward with their withdrawal committee to find out what their options are, and they'd like to start with learning about the AOS.
So if they join that AOS, what could that potentially, or does it affect the budget here at all?
It would affect your central office budget, your system administration, because it initially would only impact your central office. Because what that would do is it would take the superintendent of schools, the assistant superintendent of schools, the director of special education, and the staff. And they would also work for Wiscasset then, so that would reduce your cost share. So you would go from 63% roughly to about 43. Some very rough numbers I've calculated based on some data I got online.
Could there potentially, would you, and this is strictly looking into a crystal ball, but would you potentially see that, say, 5 years down the line, that Wiscasset may offer, I'll pick German, and Boothbay doesn't offer German anymore, and you go there to take, you see what I'm saying? To be
We actually do
swapping
that
with
already,
students?
Steve, we actually do that already. We do have students that go up for some classes that we don't offer, and we have students that come down with the principals. We'll discuss that if we have students that are really serious about their learning.
Pick up the wrestling team and take them.
So we do as much, we do that sharing. Because they have their own schools, those students are required to attend school where they reside. But if we are offering programming that a student might be interested in, then we do try to make that available anytime we can.
Isn't Wiscasset discussing closing their high school?
I haven't heard that officially.
I've heard officially. Rumor.
Interesting. Okay, anybody else? I have one question. It really has nothing to do, well, it's sort of, why teach Latin? I went to the thing last night of the high school presentation, and it's just, isn't Latin a dead language?
It's the root of all languages.
I understand medically speaking, a doctor would probably want to take Latin, but do you really have many students that like to take Latin?
Yeah, we really do. And actually, every time we look at maybe eliminating a program and we talk about foreign language, we have parents and students line up ferociously to keep those programs. Any student going into the sciences and foreign languages and humanities to some extent will benefit greatly from having the background in Latin.
I took that 30 years ago, and I don't remember a dang thing that I took. You don't get a chance to use it, and you don't.
You can't remember what you did yesterday.
Good point.
I have a question, if you guys are all done. So on the projected budget revenue, the June 2013 additional subsidy, that's the carryover of the retirement from last year.
Yes.
So that's $90,000.
And the retirement now is in the budget where it should be, based on where you're teaching. But there was an additional subsidy that was then, when they adopted the budget last year at the end of the session, that gave us $90,000 more. So that money was not spent, that was automatically applied to offset your expenditures for this year.
So that's a $90,000 influx of revenue that we get for 1 year.
1 year. So I'm gonna hold next year at 90,000.
So then this is an increase of $129,000 overall to the town of Boothbay, but without that $90,000, it's a $190,000 increase to the town of Boothbay and $280,000 increase overall on the budget for the school. Is that correct?
I believe you. I haven't calculated those numbers that way. Yeah. Yeah.
So then where it says that it's a 2.48% increase on the budget, it's really a 3.1% increase on the budget because that $90,000 isn't there next year, and there could be another increase in between that. And like next year, there's flat budget isn't probably going to happen. Okay.
Eileen, you mentioned tuition students. How many tuition students do we currently have?
We're projecting about 50 for next year. However, I'm pretty conservative with the projections on 7th graders because they're not guaranteed until they actually walk through the door. So I know we have 7th graders in Southport and Edgecombe that are interested in coming here. I don't project all of them because I don't know for sure at this point where they're going.
Of the projection that you have, what's the breakdown between elementary and secondary?
Right now, I'm projecting about 12 middle school students, which is conservative, it's low, because I know I have more 7th graders coming in. And then I have 36, 37, 40, about 40 high school students coming in right now. I do know some fluctuation, some movement, but I don't have anything guaranteed.
What's the tuition rates right now?
The state tuition rate's about $9,600.
Is that an average of the two?
Yes, I can look
A
it
little
up.
bit more for one, a little bit
Yes,
less.
yeah, it's about an average.
I just did some quick figuring, maybe my math is wrong. If we're bringing in students from outside of our area, and those towns are only paying $9,600 on average for a student, how is that fair to our taxpayers who are paying $14,583 a student?
Well, first of all, you're gonna have to pay for the bricks and the mortar. You're gonna have to pay for the
Understand.
heat and electric.
Yep.
You have to pay for your buses, and we're not transporting them. So those costs are already built in, or are already gonna be required. I think your number of 14,000 is, let me just check my state rates. And I think when we talked to the trustees about this, we wanted to make sure that we were in the ballpark of the tuition rates, because in order to offer the quality programming and the kind of programming we have, and have robust programming in our schools, for us to be not competitive with our tuition rates would require us to lose tuition. I believe the trustees' sentiment was they'd rather get the $9,000 or the $9,600 than nothing at all, and that's what would happen.
And how many students do you have total with tuition right now?
Just about 50, I'm projecting.
So if you took them 50 out, how many programs, I mean, you might as well say the high school, because realistically, that's probably what.
Middle school and high school.
How many of them programs would be lost, or would be available to our kids, so to speak?
I couldn't even begin to calculate that off the top of my head.
But some.
Yes.
Why is it?
Did you say programs?
Well, classes, I should say.
Class.
I mean,
Programs would not be reduced at all.
Well, I'm not sure at what level we can maintain the quality or the number of programs that we have. We'd still have to offer educational services, but I'm not sure that we would be as rich in the STEM and the programs that we're offering right now.
Well, it depends on how well we collaborate with other area high schools. I know Lincoln's private, but Wiscasset is not. And I know you guys gotta have some conversations with them, but I would think that any way we can help each other save a little money would be the best thing to look at.
looking at the state's information, tuition rates, all that stuff, we're up around the 14,000 something mark. I think.
11,504.
For, what year was that?
Last year.
The one I just looked at, it said 14, I could have swore on the website, but I maybe.
Well, these are the rates,
Anyway, but it
these
seems
rates
like-
are given to go by.
But if you look at them, coastal communities traditionally are more. Why is that?
I think we're more isolated and we have smaller schools, and smaller schools are more expensive to operate.
I mean, it's just, you're looking at if you go onto the Department of Education's website, and it breaks down everything. I mean, it has students and everything, and I was looking at it, and it amazes me, if you look at other towns, all the little coastal towns, and I mean, we're little compared to some, it's a lot higher per average student than it is in a place like Livermore or somewhere that's kind of out of the way. And you would think it'd be just the opposite.
Up in that area, they do a lot more busing than we do.
Sure.
Jim?
So the obvious question, thank you. guys for coming to our meetings, because the selectmen are very cognizant of the tax rate when they do their budgeting. You know, it's the elephant in the room. And what we do a lot is we do projections of tax rate based on the things that we know. So I told the selectmen at the last meeting that I project the tax rate for next year in Boothbay to be flat. I don't expect any change. Knowing that, I applied some assumptions here, there, and everywhere. So you have a little bit of flexibility before we'd have to increase the rate, and essentially the increase of the school budget takes about 83% of that flexibility away. So in the good old days, the prior to 2008 days, when the land value of the town of Boothbay was growing exponentially, it didn't really much matter. You know, the growth of the town was outpacing any growth of budgets. Well, that's not true anymore. Essentially, I just did a little bit of quick math, and the growth in the school budget outpaces the growth in the town by 5.5 times. So next year, if we come with a linear type increase to the budget, we won't be talking about a flat tax rate. So does the school committee take that into account when they're coming up with their budget? And do they understand the pressures that the selectmen gotta go through while they're trying to come up with these numbers?
Yep. Yes.
One thing I would personally like to see, I mean, it seems like this is earlier this year than tradition. Maybe
It's usually about this,
We know this from last year.
I think, yeah, I've been trying to get Jim the materials earlier. We did not get any subsidy numbers until about 2.5 weeks ago, so that put all of our budgets at a standstill because I didn't have any revenue numbers to give you.
So going back to the whole, I hate to beat a dead horse, sorry guys, but going back to the whole charter thing, having this done, which you do, which is great, there's no reason why that couldn't be put on our town warrant and voted on at town meeting instead of having a separate meeting on a separate time in a separate month. Most towns do their school budget at the town meeting. That would be another benefit, I
You
think.
mean have their budget on warrant
With
on
our-
a regular town meeting?
Right. I mean, of course, that would
So
take a charter change.
out of curiosity, how would you calculate if the budget passed? You have a community school district that's required to hold, that's not by charter, but required to hold a separate budget meeting because you're dealing with more than one town. I understand when I go to Georgetown, Southport, and Edgecombe, I go to their town meeting because that's where their school budget's raised. But because you have two towns involved, we are required to hold a separate referendum for the school budget.
Didn't you used to have to keep track of it by town?
There used to be a ratification component of the school budget, but I think we elected not to do that in the future. Is that correct?
That was the budget validation process, and that was voted again. That was when the new budget process came in. There was a budget validation process where you would go to the polls. You would have the meeting, and then you'd go to the polls following the meeting to support the actions that took place at the meetings. And the towns voted not to do that any longer. And so we've continued. That happened for 3 years.
The biggest complaint I've always heard is the school budget meeting or the vote is at the school during the school hours, and people just don't bother. And then, of course, the adage, if you go to the meeting that night or during the day, all it is school teachers and spouses. I'm just telling you what you hear.
I go, I pay taxes, I vote.
So,
I'm guilty.
It isn't during the day, it is in the evening.
But it would make so much more sense, and maybe you're 100% right. I don't know that answer, whether you could do it at town meeting. It would at least allow the people to ask them questions, you know, in their setting and not going to the school to do it, that's all.
So two towns, I mean, you can't do it, you know, separating it.
I think in the old days we could have, when we both had town meetings the same night,
Yeah.
but now we
True.
don't.
Yeah.
So
Ours
which
is on
meeting
Monday
would I go
night,
to?
theirs is split up between Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, no, ours is split out now, so you really, depending on what year it is, Boothbay Harbor could pass it or defeat it, and the taxpayers in Boothbay would know long before they met, or vice versa. That could pose a rub to
I
us.
think it almost has to be town meeting.
Yeah.
It would cause so much trouble.
Yeah, you're probably right. We answered our own
Good idea,
questions, sorry.
good idea, Steve.
Any more questions?
I really do appreciate the dialogue. I know it's a pain in the butt, one more night meeting. But you know, when Boothbay taxpayers get their tax bill in the mail, it has my name on it. So that usually if they don't stop at these guys, they come right to me when they're complaining about increases and stuff like that. So it's important for me to be able to say, here's the school strategy and this is what's going on.
Oh, while they're here, I mean, it's not really, it will fall into them eventually, but Andrew Morley, he talked to me the other day, I don't know if he's talked to any of you other folks, but, and Tyler and I had this discussion as well about the possibility of a track for the school. And they've got big ideas, and I wish them well. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware of their ideas. They seem to think they can go out and build a track 100% fundraised, and with zero tax dollars to build it, and then it would just be turned over to the school for the maintenance afterwards. I think it's a great idea. I think if they can do it, there should be lessons learned from it, no doubt about it. I wish them well.
But like anything else, it needs to be maintained
I
and
agree.
everything after that, so there's always a cost involved.
You're right, but I think that a track would be well used by all, not just the school kids. I think it would be well used. You wouldn't have to have a membership to walk a track outdoors like you do at the Y. So I think it'd be great. It's just a matter of coming up with that big money to do it. So,
There's a good group that's running it right now. I think they have possibilities of pulling it off.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I think it's, I mean, personally, I made this comment a couple of months ago. That to me is much more important than tennis courts. And this is just me, I'm not taking a jab at you by no means. I'm just, a lot of people, the elderly people as well, I think would go up and use it. in the
Without
summertime.
question, I think it would be highly used by
Yes.
our community.
So I think it's a great idea, and I hope they do well.
Just to ask the obvious question, and I think I know the answer, but let's put it out there publicly. It would be accessible to the public when there wasn't events going on, when there was a track and field practice or whatever. Like I said, I think I know the only answer, but we might as well have it said.
Oh.
We try to make-
Jeez, keep
I just-
going. You
I
guys
just-
keep going. The only problem, the only concern, I'm not gonna say problem, the only
Liability.
concern I have is security, safety. Where they're talking about placing it is up behind the elementary school. And during the school, I think it's great for people to be able to walk it in the morning before school opens, and walk it after school. Where the tennis courts are a little bit more visible, they're down, on, right off the parking lot. We don't have a lot of little kids down there that much. Probably shouldn't have many there at all. I worry a little bit more when it's up behind the elementary school recess time than having strangers walking the track. That just, my little red flag goes ding, 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 so.
Everything you just said plays well to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Maybe it would be a location thing for the track, or maybe it's something we
I
have
just think we just-
to address later on.
I think we keep an open mind, and instead of developing some hard, fast rules, whether a yay or nay, we take every issue as it comes and use common sense.
No, I agree with you. My thought process is accurate.
Are the tennis courts open and usable now? The reason why I ask is I read that in the Boothbay Harbor Selectmen's meeting, someone said they
They're
weren't
unlocked. They're unlocked.
So they are used, they are
I don't know if
used.
the nets are up yet, but,
The nets, this weekend, the nets are going up, the lines are on, the tennis team starts to practice on Monday. We've purchased a kiosk that we can post the usage of the tennis team in the school, so that when community members want to use the tennis courts, if they show up and they want to play at 10, but they see there's a class coming down at 10, they'll know that they'll have to change their time to another time, so.
With all the technological gurus you have in that school, kids amaze me on the little iPads and stuff. Couldn't you develop something where they could go it online and
We can put on
sign
our,
up?
absolutely, we can put on our Facebook page, but if we have people signing up for it, and we could do it that way right now, and we can put our usage on the Facebook page, but plans change. One day might be rainy, and the phys ed teacher might say, well, we'll play down tomorrow, and so, once again, this is one of those cases where we're going to move forward and we'll address issues as they come up instead of creating rules ahead of time, so.
Okay, I'm just curious. Any more questions? Thank you, guys.
Questions from the public?
Questions from the public?
Oh, sorry.
Actually, I have a couple of questions relevant to last year's appearance at the board here. One of the items that you talked about in depth was bringing some vocational training back to the school itself, not the Bath. What's the status on that? What's the success of it been?
We have a teacher that is doing a variety of, it's not vocational, but it's called technology education, which is the new name for the shop classes that we're familiar with. They are doing boat building, they are doing woodworking, they are doing car mechanics, they're also doing some other types of activities. And so that has come back. About 4 classes are being offered at the high school right now.
How many students are involved in it, do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. I could get that information to you.
I'd like to see it, yeah. And a couple of comments on the tennis courts plus one other comment. Last year at the meeting when you talked about the tennis courts, I remember a dollar figure being thrown out. And looking at the cost of the tennis courts, the cost of the tennis courts seems to be more than double what that figure was. Do you have any recollection of that kind of an increase?
I don't remember talking about the cost of the tennis courts a year ago at this time, because I know we hadn't gotten to bid.
You did, and it was $160,000.
I'm pretty sure I did not say 160. I remember thinking it was going to be between 260 and 360.
Well,
And it came in at 360. We added 30,000 for contingency.
Okay, a couple of other comments too. Personally, I'm very disappointed in the way some of that was handled internally and not coming back to the town. I think it's very wrong to do. So that's just my personal comment. And the final comment is I'm going to give you a Latin test. Omnia Gallia est divise patres. Can you tell me where it came from?
No, I was a Spanish major.
Caesar's Gallic Wars, come on. And Latin is the root of all dead. It's a dead language, but it's not. I have a friend of mine who actually converses in Latin with people still, and I can still say I'm not a Catholic, but I can still say the Catholic Mass 100% in Latin.
So Fran, I am going to commend you that if they indeed discussed the tennis courts last year when they were here, then I don't remember it, none of us do, because if we remembered it, we wouldn't have gone there a few months ago, and we would have saved a lot of headaches. So we should have checked with you first.
I think what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll listen to the presentation that John recorded. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We've gone through reports. We're going to move on to old business. Document scanning vote.
At our last meeting, we discussed whether we could pull off this document scanning project. So I started at the really high level, how are we doing on our budget, how our revenue's coming in. It's that time of year anyway, so I had to do it, which leads to the memo that I put in your packet, because it's pretty good news. Essentially, our revenues are tracking in at about 101.9%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you calculate it out, we bring in almost $1 million in revenues. So that means we are expecting to be on the positive side about $170,000. Now those are based on projections, so when we get to June 30th, don't come killing me if we're off a little bit. Expense projections are coming in at 99.21% of total budget, which is also good. That means we're on budget. It leaves about $67,000 worth of room. That altogether says about $250,000. I would never say let's go spend $250,000 because these are projections. But it does say that we have room in our budget, that we will have room, we'll be in the black. This report, as well as what we'll talk about on the annual town meeting warrant, I want to propose a question that allows the selectmen to take unexpended funds and transfer to a place that's overexpended. Because we'll have accounts that are going to be underexpended and we'll have accounts that are overexpended. And rather than worry about that, just ask town meeting to allow us to shift that over than asking for permission to do appropriation or anything like that. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is that I think you have the ability to pay for it now. What I would probably do to be on the safe side, and I've got to call into records management, is work out a payment arrangement so that we pay half in one fiscal year and we kick out the other half to the next fiscal year. But the room is there if you guys want to.
I have a question about that quote. Is that quote still good? And the reason I ask that is you would ask them for a quote for 2 towns,
Yeah.
and one town has since backed out.
We purposely asked for 2 independent quotes
Okay.
because of this. We thought actually predicted maybe the opposite happening, where Edgecombe would do the scanning because it's inexpensive, and maybe we wouldn't do it because it'd be more expensive. But I didn't foresee us wanting to do this all, maybe in this fiscal year. So the quote is still good. I did have one quick conversation with Scott, the guy that quoted us out, and he's ready to work with us. We've had internal conversations within code enforcement about how are we going to do this most cost effective. You saw the quote, it's based on clicks. So if we can reduce the amount that we do, like if we have redundancies in files, we eliminate those, we can drive down the cost.
It says in here, labor to load and transport files, so they're gonna take the files out of here, where do they go with them?
They take them to Bangor. One of the other things that records management does is secured file transfer and shred in and all that stuff. So they have liability and insurance coverage to make sure that they don't have any issues with file transfer.
So they won't come here and do it?
Yeah.
They can, but it's more expensive.
That bothers me.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go back to the argument that the Edgecombe folks had, when we were talking about. I mean, we have some pretty historic documents. I mean, the average stuff, don't bother me so much, but we have some pretty historic stuff that you would want.
Well, the planning and zoning files, really the planning and zoning files that system was initiated while Marion was here, so it's not that old. It's bulky. And we feel pretty confident that a professional records management can transport these, and they only have to get it one way before it's scanned, and then we get it returned. They said about a week. So the work plan that we've discussed internally is that they said we'll come in and we'll box your stuff. I'm like, no, we'll box our stuff. So we'll get a whole bunch of bank boxes. We'll go through the files. We'll eliminate the duplications. We'll eliminate, because these guys know this. If there's a Post-it note in there that says question mark, they'll scan that.
Right.
So we'll eliminate those things to reduce the cost. We'll put them in the banker's box. We'll mark the banker's boxes, and then we'll set them to the side. And then essentially we'll give them a call and say, come pick them up. And they've got procedures and protocols to make sure. One of the ones that he told us about is if they have a flat tire on the way to Bangor, they do not leave the truck unattended. They have, these guys are professional document movers. So.
Yeah, but there's still that chance. How much more would it cost to have it done here?
I didn't have them quote that because they'd be bringing their equipment in here. They'd have to do it over multiple days.
You're talking substantial money.
When he was talking about it, it started sounding pretty costly, so I was like, no, let's go with the transfer option.
Well, when we talk about copying or digitizing all of our documents, some of the documents in the vault that have marriage, all that stuff, is that all included?
No, we're not talking about, and we wouldn't do those. There's special laws for those types of documents. We would handle them completely separate. We're talking about zoning and planning files, that big wall of documents. We talked about it in the department head meeting where this would be a test case to do essentially like we have all of our old warrants from 80s, 90s upstairs. Maybe that if this works well, we would scan all that and we wouldn't even retain them. We would get rid of those.
There's no law saying once it's digitized, you can get rid of it.
These ones we would keep.
No, I'm talking.
But those ones we probably would ditch.
Under the laws about having to retain so much of this stuff, you wouldn't have to if it's out in the cloud.
And the way you have this digital search too is then we would start to explore something a little more sensitive like birth, death records and stuff like that. But that I wouldn't be as confident doing birth, death records.
Would you have the ability, I don't know how big a file it would be once you get all that scanning stuff done, but do you have the ability to back that up every so often so you have a hard copy on a disk or whatever you want to call it?
They had already said that part of their services they would give us a disk. one of the things that we talked about internally is that maybe we would get multiple discs and offer that disc to people that you regularly look at our files, like realtors. You know, like leave us alone, here's your own disc. It wouldn't cost us really anything to do that. So we'd have a disk backup, plus they back up their own system in 2 locations that are in separate parts of the state. So,
Well, I understand your rationale about giving realtors the disc. I'm not comfortable with that. If they want to come in and request information on a certain lot, they're more than welcome to do it, as anybody else is. But to give any specific people an entire disc of all of our records, I'm not comfortable with that at all.
it's all publicly accessible, and the thought process was that, you know, it takes employee time to look that stuff up, and if we could streamline it, then essentially we could reduce the cost of.
Understood, but if they want to request it, they can come into the office to see that file. If they have our files, I'm not comfortable with that.
I mean, they got access to the pertinent stuff already online. I'm not pertinent, but information on a property.
Yeah.
Could the stuff, after it's digitalized, couldn't that be put online into?
We've talked about it, but we wouldn't want access to the online digital one, because then I think that the inclination would be that somebody would say, I accessed this online, and we'd have to verify, like, you know, maybe they doctor a subsurface wastewater document, and can we actually reconcile that? And I don't know.
That would be a good argument, Chuck's argument of they need to come in and request it rather than give them all.
Right, and I'm just saying that was an internal discussion that we talked about that is a possibility. I mean, we've talked about that with tax maps. We're gonna print off, I mean, our assessor is now he is a mapper. That's actually their primary job. They do assessing on the side. We were gonna print off extra tax maps and give them to the realtors. Like, leave us alone, here's your own tax map. You know, really, probably about 3/4 of what the code officer does in foot traffic is dealing with realtors. People want to know, hey, when was this septic system put in? Is it going to expire? Do we have to replace it before I buy the house?
Could you, well, even a crafty enough guy could still do it, but I was gonna say you could make it only read-only documents online. They couldn't print them, you know, they can only view. But
It's still,
somebody can bypass it, so.
it's still 1,000 times faster, even if we abort the idea of giving anybody that somebody like Lori gets an email from, you know, a realtor and says, I'm looking for this document. We can just take the folder and email it out. There you go.
The reality of it is, my concern is, I think that we're one fire away from having one heck of a mess. Whereas if we had this done, at least it's stored somewhere.
So that theory, then I know everybody's concerned about getting it from here to Bangor, but we're one fire here that ruins everything, or you might have a car wreck between here and Bangor and ruin a portion of it. But is that worth the risk to make sure that we don't lose everything here during one event?
Unfortunately, I think you're right. I do. I mean, I don't disagree.
I think it depends on how much the extra cost is to have them come here.
I mean, I'm sure he can find out. I'm sure the guy will have no problem throwing out an estimate for us, but
I'm sure he'd be happy to.
I think it'll scare you, but I could be wrong.
I was more concerned about the transportation, because I thought we were doing everything, the old birth and death certificates and stuff like that, and I wouldn't want that transportation.
We would do that in-house. There's no way we want those vital records to leave this place.
That was my, you know, because that to me is historic, so to speak, you know.
And truthfully, let's be honest, that things get lost or taken out of code enforcement and planning files all the time. Somebody comes in, wants to review the file, people steal them. I mean, they take out something out of a file. How are we going to know not all files are identical?
Right.
Yeah,
So-
but we're not talking about losing some information out of the file. We're talking about the possibility of losing all the files.
Yeah. But we are talking about a professional company that does this for a living.
I'm sure they're in fireproof containers.
It's not like me throwing it in the back of my pickup.
The company that picked up blood here in Boothbay Harbor and got into the accident in Edgecombe was a professional company, but they ended up getting into an accident in Edgecombe too, losing all their samples. Accidents do happen.
Absolutely. Well, can we find out what it would cost to have them come here to tell the difference?
Yeah, sorry.
I think it'd be worthwhile to have that figure anyway, because maybe we want to budget our historical files for down the road next year or the year after, and budget that in someplace. At least it gives us a budget number to work with. But I'm still thinking for just the planning and stuff like, I mean, we'll see what this
One way or
figure
the other, I
is.
think we need to do it, whether it be here or there. I just think that it's something that should have been done 5, 6, 8 years ago when the technology was available.
So I'm not saying it's not something
Right.
we don't need to do.
No, I
We need to do
understand.
We could supplement the digital file after they make it with our own scans. We could scan our own folders, but what we had talked about is the searchable function of this is almost as valuable as just having it digitally. So we may set aside files as they accumulate and then work out with them how we get them fit in. So we might come in the future, if this works well, we might come in the future and say, here's our budget for maintaining our library. It'll be much smaller, much smaller. But essentially you'd be saying the 10, 15 files that get updated through planning board have to get scanned in, you know, the additional information. So I'll get that quote from you.
Next up is Lincoln County correspondence, and the reason, I guess I can speak to that. Jim drafted the letter like we requested, and I didn't want to sign it without you guys reading and approving of it. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. Do you think that it hits the mark or what we're looking?
I do.
I don't think we need to have a motion. It's just, I just didn't want, I didn't feel comfortable signing it without
Consensus.
a consensus, that's all. Okay. Easiest thing to hit all night.
Back to the mutual aid agreement.
Mutual aid agreement with Bristol. I see we have one that was signed by them.
Yes, so
We had that last week.
yeah, we discussed it with the fire chief and ran it by legal. Everything seems to pan out well. Essentially, Chief Spofford called their chief and asked, you know, "Hey, why are we doing this?" I mean, they'd already kind of conceptually talked about it, but they hadn't talked about why. And Bristol just feels more sure having a formal document, like, you know, which I can understand. Chief Spofford has no reason why we shouldn't pass legal review. I mean, it's just a reciprocal agreement, so.
Doesn't hold us to nothing, really.
No, and our lawyer said, well, I would have wrote it differently, but it's already signed, so it's fine. Which is how it always goes with our lawyer.
And this is good for 1 year, not perpetual.
It don't sound like it's just kind of open-ended.
Yeah,
The
that's
reason I
how,
ask that is we can enter into a 1 year agreement. We can't enter into anything longer than a 1 year agreement.
It's a reciprocal agreement.
Yep, but we can only enter into anything for a 1 calendar year period. Anything longer than that has to go to town meeting. I have no problem signing it.
Right.
But it needs to be year by year unless they want us to take it to town meeting.
I mean, it's essentially no flag went up when we brought it to the attorney, and I can only assume that it's just because it's just reciprocal service agreement. There's not actually a monetary exchange. You're just saying if there's a fire, we'll attend and vice versa.
Our attorney needs to make up their mind then, do we have the authority to sign multi-year deals or not? And what we keep getting told is we have the authority to enter into 1 year agreements, anything longer than that has to go to town meeting. So they can't change their mind every time something new comes along.
But I guess maybe the argument is it's just, it's an agreement and not a contract. Because I mean, if this keeps talking about this agreement, really, all you're basically saying is if you guys need extra help, yeah, we'll come if we're available. That's really all it says.
Right, but as we were talking with Becky at the last meeting about the use of the old landfill, that's an agreement between her and the town. Anything longer than a year, we have to take it to town meeting. That's an agreement, that's not a contract.
True, but that's using town land.
You're
That's
using
using
town
property.
equipment and town personnel.
But they do already.
I know.
But you have the authority to offer service. So, you know, I don't think this goes outside of your authority. Your authority is to provide fire services. So you're just saying, our fire services can go here if they need to.
So could we, in theory, I mean, following down your line, in theory, sign this, and you just revisit it every year?
I'm comfortable with that.
I think that's what we do. I mean, that makes the most sense to me.
Unfortunately, it means we sign paperwork year after
Yeah.
year after year, but I'm comfortable with helping.
That they probably won't even put out to us, we're just gonna have to flag it in the calendar someplace.
Or we could just say renew it, whatever. It would just be an internal thing from us. I would ask Sally that question though. When, you know, and if maybe we sign it now, and they'll have to sign it again if she says that, I don't know. But we make a motion to.
If she's going to tell us that we don't need to sign it, then she needs to explain to us why.
Right.
Listen, I'm on both sides of this coin. I understand Chuck's concern, it's an agreement that we're only allowed, we only have the authority for 1 year. But it's an agreement we're already been doing, we just didn't have a physical, a letter saying that we have an agreement. So it's pretty convoluted, but there's legitimacies on both sides of this.
That being, like you said, we've been doing this for years, but we never put our name to paper.
We never made it formal.
Yeah.
Now we make it formal and it becomes difficult.
And I think a lot of the driving force of this is, I mean, we all read the newspapers and watch the TV. Volunteerism is a dying breed. The fire department, especially during the day, have harder and harder time getting staff. That's their way of assuring their townspeople, hey, if we can't get adequate crew, we've got agreements with other towns.
I think you're right, and I think that's why they're trying to formalize.
Right.
I think even if we took it to town meeting would say, yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
Formalize an agreement for umpteen years.
I wish they would have done it a few weeks ago, because we probably could have get it on this warrant and be done with it.
I think we sign it, ask Sally if it needs to go to town meeting, then we bring it to town meeting next year.
I'll make a motion that we sign this for a 1-year period and then explore our options within the next 12 calendar months.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor? Now we move on to new business, which is the Boothbay Region baseball funding request.
So we've received a funding request for the Boothbay Region Baseball Association. I think I talked to the chairman as well. In an ideal world, we would receive this funding request a lot sooner, but it's not an ideal world. So if the selectmen are inclined to fund this, I would just recommend that we not create another article on the warrant, because the warrant is pretty much done and we need to act on that tonight. And maybe we could fund this in the way that we did the senior citizens last year through undesignated.
That's what I was going to suggest, that we take $500 out of contingency and let them know that we need to have the request in sooner next year so that we can get it on the warrant.
Just to give you a little bit of a reason why, Jimmy Abbott, you know Jimmy, has started last year to try to build the baseball. It was kind of in disarray just from, you know, and he didn't even know where they get their money from, honestly. And I've had several conversations with him. He's actually doing, I mean, he doesn't have a dog in the fight, you know, he doesn't have a kid here, he doesn't live in town, matter of fact, he lives in Wiscasset, but he cares about the kids' baseball program, so he's trying to do something with it, and if you look on the back of this is where this conversation with him and I came from, is he got these bills of liability insurance from Cal Ripken Baseball, and he went to one of the guys and he says, well, where do we get this money? And they said, well, I don't know, we don't have any money in the checking account. So last year he was able to pay them by money they had the previous years, just in the account. So he approached me, and then I told him he needed to go see Jim, because he didn't know the process, he needed to go, and it was kind of late at that time.
So Jimmy actually came and saw us last year and talked about the field out here.
Doing work on the field,
Yeah.
right. But he didn't, at that point, he didn't need money for the baseball association. He didn't know where, I mean, he's still trying to learn it, but I gotta commend the guy for putting in the time and the effort. He's also talked to Jim about wanting to do a little more of this field and stuff. I mean, for a guy that has no kids in it and lives out of town, and he was willing to come out and put in his time with our kids, I think that says a lot.
That's why I'm all for making sure that we're able to fund this, even though it came in this way.
We talked about possibly building an equipment shack down there, because if he's gonna have equipment and stuff, it would be nice to just have it right there in the field.
So do we need to?
I'll make a motion that we take $500 out of the selectmen's contingency fund and let Jimmy know that we need to have the request sooner next year so we can get it onto the warrant.
Second. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Now that he's funded, we chase down the people that were funded in the last year and say, hey, get your funding request in before this date, so we'll chase them down next year.
Next up is quitclaim deeds.
I'm not sure you have all of the quitclaim deeds that need to be signed.
We have
because-
2.
Yeah, there's actually gonna be 3. The 2 that you have were on the list and we knew about them, but we hadn't verified the payment yet. So we knew about them last meeting, so we just scheduled them to be signed this meeting. I'll add one more that is on our hit list too, and I think I gave you that.
We have the Middle Road one
Yeah.
and the Moose Ridge.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you also to do 471 Back Narrows Road. That was the one that was on, she came in paid in full.
Okay.
So, these are all tax foreclosures, and essentially, I'm gonna refer to them by the book and page from 2012 that the tax lien goes back to. So book 4536, page 17, book 4535, page 217. Yeah, correct, yeah. Weird. And book 4536, page 14. We'd like to release all of those deeds, all the payments have been made in full.
I'll make a motion that we sign the quitclaim deeds that Jim just presented to us.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
That's correct.
So, the final item is the annual town meeting warrant.
Yay! So let me first address the one thing that I'm asking you to change, and then we can go back to everything else. I think I sent it out, did I send it out electronically to you guys? No? So I am requesting that you guys add one more warrant article. This would be Article 37 on top of it, and the wording that I'm requesting is to see if the town will authorize the Board of Selectmen to transfer up to 10% of unexpected balances between counts as needed. Essentially, and we're only asked for it this year, and we can tack it on next year if you guys want to, but essentially that would allow us within fiscal year 2014, and I guess it would go for the life of this, so we could actually do it in 2015 if we wanted to take accounts like if legal's underspent and snow is overspent, we just transfer that over. Now we obviously know that snow is overspent. We have the authority by law to go up to 15%, and then we have to ask permission. We talked about a little semantics. Sally's been out, but we talked about semantics. The snow budget's over by more than 15%. But if you read the law, it kind of says maintenance and roads. So public works is not over by 15%. It is over. We're projecting that public works as a whole will be over, I think it's 6% or something like that. So it's essentially, this is just me playing it safe and saying, well, let's just ask voter approval just to take money from here and there. And that way we don't have to raise any more taxes or ask any more questions of can we go over. I think the public would be understanding of that question.
The question wouldn't allow us to spend more money than was approved last year. It would just allow us to move extra money from this account to offset another account. The bottom line would still be the bottom line.
That's correct. And we're predicting that the bottom line is going to be very, very black.
And I'd rather ask for permission, be totally transparent than use the semantics and say, well, you know, technically you probably can't, but because of the, I'd rather be very upfront. I mean, everyone understands the winter we've had, they've got to understand.
Yeah.
Unless they've been in Florida all winter. But even then, you turn on the TV and that's all that's been on the Weather Channel and everything else. So.
And I really think that the public really cares about the bottom line. just, you don't need any more from us? Okay, we'll do whatever you gotta do. So I think this will be a non-issue, but now that we've redone our financials, we are able to report these things in real time now too. In the past, we would have been doing this in July, and we said, well, after the fact, can we actually ask for permission to overexpend? And the public would have said, well, you already did. Well, now we're saying we expect to overexpend. Can we get permission to transfer these monies that would take care of that?
But what's kind of, I mean, what's don't want to lose in this though, is the ability to have that flexibility in the budget, which means that between us and the town manager and department heads has been able to come in under budget in different areas in order to allow us to ship that money.
Right.
I mean, if we'd have expended money just because it was in the budget for the sake of expending it, we wouldn't have that luxury. We'd be going to town meeting asking for more money.
Right.
So
All because of snow removal.
I think that it just needs the town employee, department heads and the town manager need to be commended for that.
I agree.
And it's with selectmen approval.
With selectmen.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, we also, just to let you know, sometime in April, once we are sure that the snow is behind us, we're gonna put on a kind of a semi-spending freeze too.
Did you say April or June? It seems like it's going June this year.
Yeah, it could be July. We're gonna put a semi-spending freeze, which essentially says we're only buying essentials through June 30th. Because really, part of our plan for repairing the undesignated fund is coming in under budget. So the more we come in under budget, the better we do in repairing the undesignated fund.
Good.
As long as the service to the townspeople doesn't suffer,
Right.
I think it's fine.
It's gonna be one of those spending freezes that says you can't spend unless you ask Chip. So Mike says, hey, I need this, okay, go do that, well, but not that. you know.
Right.
We have enough public hearings coming up still to hear that too, don't we?
To hear,
The additional warrant.
well, this is gonna be an open town meeting one, so it actually doesn't legally require any public hearings, because it'll be heard in open
Yeah.
public meeting.
And then be able to get an explanation. So you're looking for approval of the warrant tonight?
Yes, and if you wanna do it one by one, or one as a whole, whatever your fancy, there's now 37 articles if you approve of that one, so.
How do you want to handle it?
Separate.
Separate, okay.
I would
So,
have lumped them, no offense.
well,
The only reason, yeah, I understand, my only reason is we've all heard them so many times, but I suspect you have a good reason for it, so let's go through them.
that being said, can we group them, do grouping?
Yes.
Why don't we, I'll entertain a motion for Articles 1 through 3.
So, second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Passes. I entertain a motion for Article 4, which is the land trust.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Now I'll explain why I asked you to separate them. With my father's passing, I became the owner of the northern boundary.
I understand.
While there is no technical conflict of interest, I didn't want there to be any appearance of one. So I had spoke to Steve before the meeting and asked him to separate them.
Okay.
The rest of the articles on.
I was gonna say, can we group the rest of them
Yes.
then?
So I am correct then that you
I
abstained
abstained.
from voting?
Yes.
Okay.
So as not to create any appearance.
Yeah. Well, I understand entirely.
I think that that would be a good thing for the town, and I don't want to do anything that would cast a negative light on it.
Nope, makes perfect sense.
So I will entertain a motion for Articles 5 through 37.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
We will provide water for the moderator when we set it.
Who is going
Do we
to,
have a moderator?
who is going to
We
moderate?
haven't done it yet. I felt like Chip did a great job last time, if you guys are okay with that.
Al,
Al doesn't like to do the open town meeting. He says in that setting, he doesn't hear well.
So
We
you-
do them here.
but you have asked him?
We haven't asked him yet this year.
I think we ought to at least
We will.
ask him.
We will.
Courtesy. I personally, I got nothing against Chip, I think he's great, but I like Al too, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Al too. We'll ask him. We'll make sure.
He's really cutting back on things he's doing. He's
Yes.
completely given up his tax practice.
Yeah, his complaint in previous years was they can't hear in that open air.
Yeah,
Right.
it's that echoey, we all have a difficult time with it at times, I understand.
And if you can't, we understand, but at least we've asked and then we can ask Chip, 'cause I like Chip too, so.
Yeah.
Public comment. Our public is thinned. So I entertain a motion to sign the warrants upon review.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?